black horror in the sky, on guard on the ground. Terrorists put the world on alert. Watching for Y2K.
What we're doing is practicing with simulated incidents.
What the government is doing to keep Canada running. And
Excuse me?
homeless
I don't want to leave.
at Christmas.
CTV News with Lloyd Robertson. Sitting in, Tom Clark.
Good evening. This has been a long night of terror for almost 200 passengers taken hostage aboard an Indian Airlines flight, and their ordeal is far from over. Among them is a Canadian, 60-year-old Shirley Macklin. The hijackers, their motives unknown, have killed at least one person, perhaps as many as 4. And at this hour, the plane, the terrorists, and their hostages are on the ground in Afghanistan. It's the 4th stop in a frightening 20-hour journey through the skies of the Indian subcontinent and the Middle East. It started this afternoon. 5 heavily armed men, said to be Sikhs, took control of an Indian Airlines Airbus in Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal. They ordered the pilot to Lahore, Pakistan, but authorities there would not give it permission to land. So, low on fuel, the hijackers then diverted to Amritsar, India. They were only given enough fuel for a 10-minute flight. So back they went to Lahore, landing this time without permission, but in the end, getting food, fuel, and then they tried to go to Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, but were again denied, being told that it would be too dangerous to land at night. The plane then headed to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. Hours of bargaining resulted in the release of 25 women and children, a few wounded men, and at least 1 dead body. In return, the plane was then refueled, and it took off, heading east, landing finally in Kandahar, Afghanistan, with the full permission of the Afghani authorities. Who the hijackers are, what they want, is unknown at this hour. Although the one murder has been confirmed, the pilot is reported to be saying that 3 others are dead. It's not known if the Canadian, Shirley Macklin, was among those released in Dubai. And joining me now is Alan Bell, a terrorism expert with the security firm Globe Risk Holdings. Mr. Bell, we haven't got any first-hand witness accounts of who these hijackers are, but from what has happened in the past number of hours, what can you deduce the nature of this?
I think it's a rather confused hijack situation. If they had a plan, I think the plan has gone awry, and currently they are looking somehow to extricate themselves from what they have done.
So if indeed they are on the run without a plan, one can assume that they're probably in full panic at this point, and that probably raises the stakes for the passengers, doesn't it?
It is. It's a more dangerous situation when hijackers don't have a plan on what they're going to do at various different stages. So yes, I think at this moment it's a rather dangerous situation.
Taking the plane as it left from Nepal would indicate that the airport in Nepal is probably a bit lax on security.
Yes, Kathmandu is not known for its tight security at the airport, and that's probably how they managed to get their weapons and explosives on board the aircraft.
If indeed there are passengers that have been murdered on this flight, can we expect that the counter-terrorist group is going to go into action?
Yes, if it can be substantiated that they have in fact killed people, and they land in a country with an effective counter-terrorist response team, I have no doubt that this team will assault the aircraft as soon as possible.
Alan Bell, thanks very much for joining us. Appreciate it. Well, back home now, hundreds of thousands of Christmas Eve travelers in Canada faced increased security today as airports tried to curb the fears of terrorism. The measures came as investigators in Canada and the United States released new details of their quest to foil a suspected international terrorist threat. CTV's Jed Kahane has details.
At border points across North America, Christmas Eve was anything but festive, as authorities continued to search for terrorists who might be planning attacks over the holidays. Number 1 on their list, this man, Abdelmajid Dahoumani, an Algerian who'd been living in Montreal. The RCMP searched his apartment and has now issued a Canada-wide warrant for his arrest. He's suspected of conspiring with Ahmed Rassan, who was arrested last week, allegedly trying to smuggle bomb-making equipment into Washington state. Police say the 2 men shared a room in this Vancouver motel, although store owner Jack El Masu, who sold food to Rassam, doesn't remember seeing his alleged accomplice.
This one, no, I have not seen this person. I've seen a lot of people, but that, no, I don't remember.
According to the Los Angeles Times, authorities in France now want to question Rassam about his role in a terrorist attack in Paris 3 years ago, a bombing that killed 4 people and injured 90. It's another reason authorities on this side of the Atlantic are on high alert.
The worries are that we may miss something. We may miss something, and it may affect the public safety.
In the meantime, 2 other suspects remain behind bars in Vermont. The U.S. Justice Department says one of them, Lucia Garofalo, has links to Algerian terrorists, and they claim Brahim Mahdi is one of them. The charge he denies.
I am not Algerian terrorist. That's the bullshit.
Regardless, authorities on both sides of the border continue to step up security, but they say they've received no specific threats about potential targets here or in the United States. Jed Gaines, CTV News, Montreal.
And a bomb scare in Israel tonight is adding to the frayed nerves around the world. Police evacuated the bus station in the northern town of Netanya after a citizen reported seeing a suspicious-looking bag. Well, that citizen's suspicions were absolutely right. There was a bomb inside the bag, and it exploded as officials were dismantling it. Now, miraculously, no one was hurt. Police say they suspect a right-wing Jewish extremist group is behind this incident, and the bomb may have been planted to upset the peace process. Officials in Bethlehem tonight are prepared for a flood of pilgrims this Christmas, but so far there's only been a trickle. Business owners are naturally disappointed, and they're quite surprised. After all, tradition tells us that the first millennium began in the city of Bethlehem with the birth of Jesus Christ. Well, today, the biblical city is part of the Palestinian West Bank, emerging from years of Israeli occupation. CTV's Rodney Palmer has more on Bethlehem at the edge of the millennium.
From barricades to boomtown, Bethlehem is struggling to emerge from economic disparity after decades of Israeli occupation, in time to play host to the world's Christian pilgrims. The mayor of the Palestinian-controlled city is pushing Christmas as the main event of the year, planning for more tourists than ever before, whether Bethlehem is ready or not.
Of course, the infrastructure in the city, the existing one, cannot match with the needs of the big needs of this huge number. But of course, they are going to come through the year 2000. And it is needless to say that everybody is going to benefit from this.
But there is still plenty of room at the inn. Tourists have not flocked to the holy city as expected, at least not the type of tourists who stay in hotels and spend a lot of money. Employees at the Bethlehem Hotel keep themselves busy these days, awaiting their chance to show off their shiny new city.
Show what we've done here, like rebuild the streets, clean the streets, make everything in a new way, not like in the old way. So the tourists will come and see something completely different than the other side.
Bethlehem's infrastructure has been given a $40 million boost from foreign donors, enough to pave the roads to merchants selling all things Christmas. Some of whom have abandoned their historic tourist attractions, like the Church of the Nativity in Manger Square, and are celebrating a more recent Christmas hero. Pilgrims and tourists come here for the ancient history. The question is, can enough of them overlook the modern history and allow Palestinians in Bethlehem to start a new era, as well as a new millennium? Rodney Palmer, CTV News, Bethlehem.
Well, Bethlehem may be the birthplace of Christianity, but the Vatican is still head office, at least as far as the planet's 1 billion Catholics are concerned. There are few places where Christmas is celebrated with such splendor. As is tradition, tens of thousands of the faithful gathered in St. Peter's Square as Pope John Paul said midnight mass. But there was also a special twist. The Pope opened a sacred door to St. Peter's Basilica, marking the beginning of the church's special celebrations for the year 2000. Well, coming up next, a Canadian air emergency on Christmas Eve. A fire forces an Air Canada flight out of the sky. Also ahead tonight, going inside Canada's Y2K Nerve Center. Those stories are still to come on CTV News. Well, there were some terrifying moments for more than 100 passengers aboard an Air Canada jet in Calgary today. They had to scramble to safety down emergency slides after one of the plane's engines burst into flames. Bill Marks has the story.
What started out as Air Canada's routinely scheduled 7 a.m. flight to Vancouver ended up being anything but that. The Airbus A320 was 30 minutes out of Calgary, over the Rockies, when pilots and passengers felt something out of the ordinary and crew members could smell smoke in the cabin. Quickly, the pilot decided to return to Calgary. Once on the ground, emergency chutes were deployed, and the 134 passengers and crew slid to safety, while emergency crews doused flames coming from an engine and the rear of the plane. Some passengers on board say there were moments of pure terror.
There was a huge flame. It went right above my head, like we were sitting right beside the wing there where the engine is, and it lit up the whole top of the cabin, and then the lights went completely out.
It just kind of turned into a little bit of chaos. I suppose everyone just wanted to get out, and we hit the slides. We were on the ground, and fire trucks were everywhere, and it's kind of interesting.
While in the air, passengers say the flight crew remained calm and professional. So much so that many didn't think there was any problem at all.
I saw one person joking, looked at me and went and crossed themselves. One lady was bent over in a kind of praying position, but she was laughing too.
Crews will now be trying to determine exactly what went wrong with Flight 201. Preliminary indications point to a problem with the number 2 engine, that there was an engine surge, where the plane experiences an uncontrolled surge in power, then a rapid decrease in power.
Within a short time of the incident, the passengers from Flight 201 were on another Air Canada plane, jetting across the Rockies towards Vancouver, where they'll be spending an exceptionally happy and Merry Christmas this year. Bill Marks, CFCN News.
Well, as the world counts down to New Year's Eve, 8 days to go, our high-tech society faces a rather nagging question. When computers click over to the year 2000, could they become rather confused and crash, threatening such things as air travel, electrical power, and so on? And that leads to this crucial question. If the Y2K bug does bite, is Canada ready to cope? CTV's Roger Smith explores that.
Plane crashes, fires, riots. A list of what could go wrong as the millennium ticks over, and a way to practice how to handle it.
What we're doing is practicing with simulated incidents, figuring out where they should go, who should be notified.
This is Canada's Y2K Nerve Center. It's where they'll monitor any problems and coordinate federal help if necessary. But Canada's ranked as one of the best prepared countries in the world. Crucial systems like power and communications have been tested, and backup plans are in place.
The backup plan is like having a spare tire when you go on a trip. You go on a trip, you hope you don't have to use the spare tire, but it's there if you need it.
The Y2K chief is confident there won't be major problems.
No, the lights won't go out. Pretty sure, pretty hopeful.
Yet there's still that outside chance the lights could go out, like they did during the 1998 ice storm in eastern Ontario and Quebec. That's a textbook case for Y2K planners. Emergency workers will be on standby. The Mounties have canceled all leave as of December 29th.
And what we're trying to do is to make sure that we've got 100% of our police force available to respond to whatever situations arise on year 2000.
Soldiers will only be called out if local authorities need help. During the ice storm, the military deployed 16,000 troops, the most since the Korean War. Even more, 25,000 troops are ready for Y2K. But the National Defense Command Center will keep an eye on developments, and until they get the call, most soldiers will be on standby, free to party with the rest of the country on New Year's Eve.
I think most soldiers will be doing, in fact, is knowing that they're ready, know that they have plans in place, ready to assist Canadians, but they will be celebrating the millennium.
One sign they're ready, outside Defense Headquarters, backup generators are waiting, just in case the power fails. Roger Smith, CTV News, Ottawa.
And still ahead tonight, nowhere to go. Evicted on Christmas Eve.
My children have nowhere to live, and neither do I for the Christmas holiday, and I don't know what I'm going to do.
And later, Cupid sets up shop in the office cubicle. Those stories are coming up on CTV News. Labor troubles could derail the travel plans of thousands of people in British Columbia this holiday season. Government-owned BC Rail is threatening to lock out workers come Monday. Management acted after union leaders threatened to stop some of the services, including a special New Year's Eve train. The two sides are at odds over contract concessions being sought by the company. The unions say that Premier Dan Miller should step in and block the lockout. Home for the holidays. 4 rather simple words that evoke images of families sharing the joys of the season this Christmas Eve. But for thousands of Canadians, there's very little joy tonight. They are the homeless. And in Ontario, their ranks are being swelled because of a new arbitration system that some critics claim favors landlords over the tenants. CTV's Peter Murphy has that.
I'm Peter Murphy with CTV. What's happening now?
They're evicting.
Excuse me?
Francine Dawkins, escorted by sheriff's deputies, is among the thousands of people evicted from their apartments every month in Toronto. But for this single mother of 3, being homeless at Christmas time is devastating.
And now I'm being evicted, my locks are being changed, my children have nowhere to live, and neither do I for the Christmas holiday. And I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know where I'm going to live.
And so as the lock is changed, a lone Christmas tree sits in a corner. There will be no presents under it this year. Dawkins was ordered evicted by the Ontario Rental Housing Tribunal after she fell behind in her rent. But the order said she should not be evicted if she paid the rent in full. Dawkins paid the back rent and has the canceled checks to prove it, but was still evicted.
In writing, I'd be amenable to...
The Ontario Rental Housing Tribunal has been operating for a year and a half after Ontario took landlord-tenant disputes out of the courts. Landlords claim the courts favored tenants. Critics say the tribunal is an eviction factory.
The tribunal is blatantly pro-landlord. Equity and fairness, even access to justice, is being denied.
Ho, ho, housing! Protesters claim the tribunal is making Toronto's homeless situation far worse. But government officials insist there are no more evictions now than before.
In terms of the number of evictions, it is remarkably the same.
Dawkins is looking for an apartment, but with almost a 0 vacancy rate and rising rents, her prospects are poor. She and her children spent several nights in a cheap motel. But when her money ran out, Dawkins was forced to stay with friends. No money means no Christmas presents.
I'm crushed. I cry myself to sleep at night. I'm tired. I'm stressed out. My children are stressed out because they're going through this with me.
I don't want to leave.
I don't want to leave either.
Tenants' rights advocates charge Dawkins and her children were evicted illegally. They insist the family's plight proves Scrooge is alive and living in Toronto. Peter Murphy, CTV News, Toronto.
Briefly, and on some other news tonight, residents were forced to flee from second-floor apartments when a Christmas Eve fire ripped through a building in downtown Ottawa today. About half a dozen people lost their homes and several businesses were also destroyed, but fortunately, no one was hurt. Canadians are pitching in to help the victims of devastating floods in Venezuela. This shipment collected in Montreal includes clothing, food, and medical supplies. But on this Christmas Eve, survivors are also pleading for toys for their children. And a penny saved is actually $31,000 for charity. That's how much Julia Murrow has amassed over 5 years for a new medical hospice in Vancouver. And her goal is $500,000. In case you're counting, that's 50 million pennies. A lot of pennies. When we return, if you're looking for love in all the wrong places, experts now say that the workplace may be the best place to start your search. Well, finally tonight, it used to be taboo, but it seems as if love is very much in the air in the modern workplace. A new book says that a growing number of people in the United States are meeting their soulmate right next to the water cooler. Now, no one has done much research on this subject here in Canada, but cohabiting co-workers are out there. CTV's Jennifer Fraser talked to one couple in Toronto. She filed this report.
Sports writers Mary Ormsby and Paul Hunter cover the game of love every day.
What happened was in 1988, Paul phoned me up one day at home and said, on a Sunday, and said, do you want to have dinner with me next Saturday?
Finally, I worked up the courage, I guess you'd say, and sort of damn the consequences, and I asked her out.
And from there on, we were inseparable.
But they kept their romance a secret.
I was more concerned about what might happen if we went out and it didn't work out and we had to work together.
Thankfully, that's never been an issue.
There has to be a lot of flexibility on both sides.
in order for it to work.
Co-workers who fall in love often worry about the repercussions of staying in the same workplace. But new statistics show the office romance is a common springboard towards nuptial bliss.
According to a new book, The Office Romance, 1/3 of all relationships in the U.S. start at work, and half of those result in marriage or long-term relationships. Why? More women in the workforce and more women who stay in the workforce after marriage. No similar figures are available for Canadian couples, but according to this employment lawyer, Canadian companies need not worry about the negative aspects of office romance.
What I would recommend is really for companies to focus on the anti-harassment, anti-discrimination policies if they're concerned about these kinds of issues in the workplace.
As for Paul and Mary, 3 kids and 10 years of marriage later, the office still provides for a healthy relationship.
It is a great way to meet somebody because you get to see them at their honest best, when they're having a bad day, when they're having a great day, how they react to stress, how they interact with other people.
It worked for us.
And it's working for their bosses, too. Paul and Mary are a happy couple at home and at work. Jennifer Fraser, CTV News, Toronto.
That has been our look at Friday, December 24th, the last Christmas Eve of the 1900s. I'm Tom Clark, and for all of us here at CTV News, thanks very much for being with us on this very special night. Good night, have a safe and happy holiday, and to all of you, have a very Merry Christmas. See you tomorrow.
CTV News, Canada's most watched newscast. For news the moment it happens, weather